no, I didn't get held back. I just had a birthday that was late in the year, so I had to wait.
Gonzo, the Coast Guard Years, Boston, Episode 3, New Bedford and the Canoe.
Most of the guys I had met at EMD were really good guys, which isn't to say that they didn't have their own issues because, well, we all did. We were all about the same age, except I was probably a year younger than all of them, which is exactly the opposite of when I was in high school. I was almost a year older than almost everyone. I used the word almost too much there. And no, I didn't get held back. I just had a birthday that was late in the year, so I had to wait an extra year before I could start school. Seriously, that's what happened. Stop thinking something different. One of the guys that I used to hang out with was a guy named LeBeau. Now, LeBeau loved music. He always had some kind of music on, and just like so many of the other coasties that I had met, he had that cheesy, stereotypical Coast Guard mustache. I mean, you know, the thin one that they brought to like the very edge of their lips. And, you know, really they were ridiculous. But then again, nearly everybody I knew who could grow a mustache did. I had such a baby face. I couldn't. I would look stupid with a mustache. Now, LeBeau, like me, was also waiting to go to a big white one. He was an ET as well. Duh, he was at EMD. But he had a particular interesting specialty. He was an EWET, which was an electronics warfare ET. I had no idea what electronics warfare was. I mean, I'm sure I heard about it on some TV show or a movie, you know, like Top Gun, the original Top Gun movie. So it was a kind of a whole new thing. It was nice to, well, I shouldn't say nice. It was interesting to know that the Coast Guard had something to do with electronic warfare, because really I had no clue about it at all. And one of the other things about LeBeau that was interesting, and I think I'm one of the few people that didn't have some weird vice except for smoking. I don't think LeBeau smoked, but whatever, I'm getting off track. He was a Diet Pepsi, dare I say, addict? He drank it all the time. He always had some in his room. And being the good guy that he was, whenever I would stop by his room in the barracks, he would offer me some, which is really nice. But it was always warm, which is another thing too. I should say warm. It was room temperature. That was one of the things that I never thought was normal. But apparently it is kind of normal just to drink room temperature soda pop from you people from up north. But LeBeau was a really good guy. But, you know, like all good guys, you know, occasionally we would do one or two things crazy or things that didn't go quite right. And when you were involved in something not going quite right and you were surrounded by a bunch of immature 20-something-year-olds, you can almost rest assured we would not let you live it down. And in this case with LeBeau, we would pick on this guy relentlessly, which is really not fair at all, because when you're in your 20s, you kind of act like a knucklehead. More on that later. Actually, you'll have to wait for the next season for me to tell you about the whole LeBeau thing. Yes, you got that right. I did it again to you. And you know, it's like that Britney Spears song, "Oops, I did it again." And yes, I'm sure you're all thinking, why on earth did I not make it as a pop star? What I meant was that there's going to be another season, so instead of telling you what the thing is, I'm going to make you wait to the next season. I'm like building it up. So, you know, building it up. It's cool. It's awesome. Anyway, you want to hear some more Britney Spears from me? Yeah, I didn't think so. Anyway, like I said, LeBeau's a really good guy, and he and I hung out almost as much as Keith and I did. And by hanging out, I mean, I would just go to his room and we would chill out, or occasionally we'd walk around somewhere in the north end of Boston or go to Faneuil Hall and hang out there. As things turned out, I ended up gravitating more toward Keith. And, you know, I don't know, Keith, he just had this way of making people comfortable no matter who or what they were. And so whatever. So there's LeBeau. And then there was also this guy at EMD who was actually from Plymouth, Massachusetts, so not too far away from Boston. His name was Ken, and Ken was, well, he wasn't the tallest guy around, but oh my God, you couldn't help but notice him, Ken, when he came into a room. He was usually absolutely hysterical, super loud, and always made people laugh. Oh God, Ken used to fuck with me all the time, but only about my hair. You see, while my hair was short on the back and the sides, I let the bangs grow out really long. I mean, they were way longer than Coast Guard regulation allowed. And Ken, also known as Savvy or Rico Suave, always made some joke about my bangs like they were like some sort of whip. Like during our morning team meetings at EMD, I don't know how this always happened, and I'm not going to say it was my fault because I usually got there before. Actually, I don't know if I ever got there before Ken, but regardless, I always ended up sitting across from him, and I'm not sure that wasn't a mistake or that wasn't done on purpose. But you know, when one of the chiefs is talking and handing out the assignments for the day, Ken would like put his hand, the back of his hand up on his forehead, and he would start whipping his hand up, making fun of my hair, because my hair was usually sticking out of my hat, which I guess is probably my fault too. He looked more like some, an elephant trunk or something like that. Most everybody knew what Ken was trying to do. He always managed to, in a conversation, talk about the whip, just to mess with me, which was kind of funny. I mean, Ken liked to screw with me, and it was all in good fun. He didn't mean anything bad by it. And honestly, I just had to roll with it because he was right. My hair was not within regulations, but it's not like he cared. And as a group, we kind of did a lot of things that were not, quite Coast Guard regulation, but that's a whole different story. I'm sure as we go along, it'll all sort of make sense after a while. Now, I vaguely remember Ken also was, so before he went to ET school, I think he was stationed in Hawaii or someplace out in the West Coast. And the reason this is important is because occasionally when it would come up in conversation, he would show this picture that he had in his wallet. So Ken had a picture of himself in his wallet, not like a girl or children or something like that. But this was a cool picture. It was a picture of him dangling from a Coast Guard helo. They would basically drop him next to like this tower, and he would change like a light bulb or do some kind of maintenance on it, which is really cool. And I'll admit, I think all of us were just a little bit jealous of Ken. But why shouldn't we be? That was some cool shit. So Ken still lived in Plymouth, Massachusetts. He used to get up super early in the morning and drive north up Route 3 from Plymouth, Massachusetts into Boston. He did this for weeks or months or something like that. That was until some of us started getting assigned to drive down to New Bedford to work on the 270s down there. So on the way down to New Bedford, we would go down Route 3. We would pick up Ken at his home. And, I think he lived in an apartment above a bar, or maybe it was some like mom and pop grocery store. I'm not even sure if any of those are right, but he did live in an upstairs apartment above some kind of like retail shop or something like that. I should point out that Ken didn't always used to wait for us when we would go down to New Bedford. That was something that got introduced later. Prior to that, in typical Coast Guard fashion, Ken used to drive to Boston from his home in Plymouth and then hop in a government vehicle with the rest of us. And by the rest of us, I mean there were a total of like 5 of us that would drive down to New Bedford. New Bedford, Massachusetts, for those not familiar with it, is an old Portuguese whaling town going back to like the 1800s. I think even for its day, it was a pretty progressive town. And I think it was a safe haven for slaves that used to come up from the South. And it was also the home of the great Frederick Douglass. Herman Melville, the author of Moby Dick, for those of you who don't know, sailed on a whaling ship out of New Bedford as well. And I'm pretty sure that's why he came up, or one of the reasons he came up with the story of Moby Dick. Because if you haven't read Moby Dick, that's okay. I'm not saying you should read it. But if you ever heard the phrase, the white whale or something about that it comes from that book. Anyway, sorry, that wasn't supposed to be a whole thing about American history or American literature. But at the crack of dawn, a bunch of us would pile into a government vehicle, which happened to be a Plymouth K car. And most of you listening probably have no idea what that is. If you can think back to a car that perhaps your grandpa might have driven or your great-grandpa, then you would be close. The Plymouth K car was an absolute piece of crap, but the Coast Guard let us drive it, which, again, to me, was pretty astonishing that they would give us a car. And actually, since joining the Coast Guard, I had never really driven anywhere. I mean, only a few times since I was in the Coast Guard. And the one time that I actually did drive when I got in the Coast Guard, I got into a car wreck. And that's a whole different story. And I'm probably never going to tell that one. But anyway, anyway. And no, it's nothing juicy or anything. Just a stupid wreck that I was in. So quit asking. We'd all pile into this K car and we'd drive off and immediately take a left onto Commercial Street. We'd only go down the road a bit. And by a bit, I mean like 100 yards or so, maybe something like that. We would park along the side of the street and we'd all file into the Dunkin' Donuts. I don't know if that Dunkin' Donuts is even still there, but it might be. I mean, there was like Dunkin' Donuts everywhere. But it was at this particular Dunkin' Donuts that I learned the meaning of coffee regular. At the time, I guess it was a simple way of just saying cream and sugar for your coffee. Although I had no idea what that was, coffee regular. But the other Coasties who had been going there a lot previously, who were in line ahead of me, that's what they would order. And I ordered the same thing, not knowing what I was getting. But, so I basically got a largish coffee regular or something like that. Actually, I found out that I actually loved it. Whenever I go to Dunkin' Donuts, I ask for a coffee regular. Except now, if you ask for a coffee regular, they look at you funny. And I just say, yes, cream and sugar. We'd fuel up on Dunkin' Donuts. Of course, we'd grab some donuts and we're on the road. And it would take overall about a little over an hour to get to New Bedford, Massachusetts. And then we'd all, every single trip, I think it was at least Keith, Ken, and I, and occasionally a guy named Don from Vermont, and a guy Sam from Georgia, and then John, Keith's roommate. But the thing about all these people in the car, which apparently was designed for a family of 6, well, the damn thing is that it was struggling to just take off. It had like no acceleration. I mean, it's partly because it was a crappy 4-cylinder. I think the car was probably rated for like 2 adults and 4 children, not 5 grown dudes. But please note, I didn't say adults, because honestly, with the exception of perhaps Ken, none of us were really adults. I mean, legally we were adults, and although John used to get pretty uptight about stuff, so he might have been considered an adult as well. Nearly each visit to New Bedford took us to the Cutter Tahoma, where a few of the ETs that were once at EMD were now stationed. A few more ETs from EMD while I was there would end up at the Tahoma as well, and it seemed like the Tahoma was a revolving door of ETs, which really isn't a fair assessment. By the time you finish all of your additional ET schools, you were usually a year or a year and a half into the additional 3-year commitment you agreed to after graduating ET school, which meant that unless you re-enlisted in the Coast Guard, you would be off the ship in less than 2 years. But anyway, I'm getting way ahead of myself here. So as I said, New Bedford was an old whaling town that eventually turned into a fishing town, where you're probably going to see plenty of commercial fishing boats. Yeah, English, Tim. And speaking of New Bedford fishing boats, New Bedford was featured in the movie A Perfect Storm, which the Coast Guard also had a small mention in that movie as well. I should probably make a list of all the movies or TV shows that the Coast Guard had some kind of mention in. I'm sure it'd be a short list, but do you know what? You would see at least Coast Guard helos in an old TV show called Baywatch. I mean, you'd always see a Coast Guard helo in there. And if you've never seen Baywatch, just go look it up. And I don't mean like the remake, the movie that was done. I mean, the television series from way back when in the 80s. Go check it out. You will thank me later. Or not, but yeah, go watch it. Anyway, so amongst all the fishing boats that at a pier, what I meant to say is amongst all the fishing boats at the piers, just next to them across the way was the Coast Guard cutter Tahoma. Or, as the crew would often call it, the Never Homa. They had this ridiculous nickname, too, that was given to the Tahoma. I'm sure some knucklehead flag officer came up with it, or it might have been someone probably less foolish. It had the name the Mighty T. And you know what? No one, while I was in, ever called it the Mighty T. It was always the Never Homa. That was it. On the pier alongside the Tahoma was a small Coast Guard building that, oddly enough, was much like a support center where, all of us had come from. But I think it was predominantly more of an engineering type support. Electricians' mates, machinist mates, which were really mechanics. I think that's what it was. The actual name of the rates, I think those have changed. So I don't know. So if I got it wrong, guys, I'm sorry. But yeah, it's been a while since I've been in, so forgive me or just ignore me. I think it's fair to say that the engineering team probably ran the bulk of the ship's critical systems. The engines, the steering, the generators, the water, the sewage, damage control. I mean, those are all like the heavy duty stuff that makes the ship run. And so, but they maintained, all that equipment and a bunch more stuff. And you know what? I think at some point I probably should just try to do an episode at least of all the stuff that I know that the ETs didn't work on, which is a really long list. Anyway, I'm way off track. So we would pull up near the ship. We'd all pile out and we'd head to the ship's quarterdeck where we'd be escorted, or we'd head directly to the ET shop on the Tahoma. So the ET shop was at the rear or the back of an area known as the Combat Support Center. Correction, I think it's the Command Support Center, but we always called it Combat because it made it sound cool. And then there was this ET. You know what? I'm going to tell you his nickname, and I'm sure it's not one he actually liked, but one of the guys, Sam, actually from Georgia, always called him Cornhole. And he was the ET one, and he was the one that was basically in charge of making sure that he was the head ET, not the ET chief, but he basically ran the whole shop. Cornhole had this really crazy hoarse voice. He sounded like he'd been screaming at a football game or a concert all the time. He was a really good guy. Really good guy. I kind of remember he was just a little maybe high strung or hyper because he was always moving around, but he was a really good guy though. And then there was also a guy named Mac, but I don't remember where he was from. And then there was Doug. Doug I do remember because I spent more time hanging around Doug. Doug was from California, and he used to play water polo in high school, I think. And why did I mention that? Because Doug was quite the accomplished swimmer. And because of that, he somehow managed to get sent to the U.S. Navy's Rescue Swimmer School. I'm pretty sure, and don't quote me on this, people, because and this has been a long time. I may have gotten my facts wrong. But apparently Doug had broken some of the Navy's school's swimming records. So if you're a coastie, that's totally cool. If you're a Navy puke, probably not so much. Mac and Doug were previously at EMD as well, which is why I'm kind of talking about them. Mac specialized in the ship's 2 surface radars, and Doug was the ship's ComDAC specialist. ComDAC was the ship's command display and control system. It was also a really large system that needed lots and lots of care and feeding. I would end up learning a ton from both Mac and Doug. Doug, for the most part, was the one that we interfaced with the most whenever we went down to the Tahoma. And we did basically PMs, more PMs, and still more PMs. And they were mostly all for ComDAC. At least that's what I remember. So the trips to New Bedford, for the most part, always began with Dunkin' Donuts and then the Tahoma and then back to Boston until the numbers started dwindling down till it was just Keith and I, the only ones heading down to New Bedford from Boston. We actually volunteered to go a lot because it got us out of Boston, and it basically was a road trip, which meant there were 3 to 4 hours where we were completely unsupervised. And I'm not sure whoever thought that was a great idea. I mean, we did whatever we wanted to do. I mean, well, not whatever, but we pretty much did. It was on one of those trips to New Bedford, which arguably is probably one of the funniest, albeit dumbest things we had done. So as I said, Keith and I had become like the main guys from Boston to make trips down to New Bedford. But on the way there, we would always make a detour and, pick up Ken in Plymouth. As I said, they were an absolute riot to be around. They were both great. Ken would have you in stitches. I swear, if Ken wanted to, he probably could have become like a clown or something like that. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean, he was hysterical. He was also the adult around us too. So it was kind of a good contrast. But Ken, I think I'm going off on a tangent. Ken used to love to fish, and he probably still does. And he had a canoe, which he almost always kept on top of his car. One, because he said it was a pain in the ass to get it up there by himself. Again, but on the spur of the moment, he would just wanted to go fishing, and he would just take us, just go. So it was always a spur of the moment thing. On one particular trip, the 3 of us made the trip down to New Bedford and the Tahoma from Ken's house in Plymouth. We worked around the boat for about an hour or 2, and then we headed back to Plymouth. So before we left Ken's home, and this is why I know about the canoe, we had asked about the canoe, and Ken gave us the whole skinny on why he kept it. As you suspect, when we left New Bedford, we had gotten Ken all excited about going fishing. And so we decided, what the hell? Let's take the canoe out. And, my dad had a canoe, and that thing was beat to hell. It had a leak, like right in the middle of it. And no matter what my dad did to patch it, the thing always leaked. Oh, yeah, the thing leaked as bad as the Titanic. But anyway, not quite as bad, but you know what I mean. But my dad's canoe ended up in some dumpster many, many, many years later. So Keith, Ken, and I had a plan, like as I said, when we left the Tahoma early, for the sole purpose of going fishing in Ken's canoe. We get back to Ken's place, we grabbed a few beers, we hopped in Ken's big ass boat of a car and headed off to some small pond not far from Ken's. We got the canoe off the car, and next thing you know, okay, hold on. So all 3 of us are still in our Coast Guard uniforms. We looked absolutely ridiculous paddling this boat or this canoe in this pond. We always made jokes that since Keith and I didn't have a fishing license and Ken was the only one that did, if a game warden had come around or whatever, not that was likely, we tell him that we were in the Coast Guard and we were doing our patrol in the pond, which is why we didn't need a license. And so we were just patrolling. We weren't actually fishing. Of course, none of that really made any sense, but also the fact that we had beers and fishing poles kind of looked like a bunch of dumbasses, and it making sense really wasn't important.
You've been listening to Gonzo the Coast Guard Years, written and produced by Tim Gonzalez, And I'm Nicholas Gonzalez, the voice guy. This episode was produced by Mislaid Productions.
Now, where did I put that thing?